do it. As a matter of fact, one of the new banners we put up there is where you can watch this program on Facebook Live. I also did some Facebook Live broadcast on both Saturday and Sunday, so certainly wanted to encourage you to watch that. And we're going to get into all sorts of issues today, including, as we so often try to do here on Point of View, to focus on things that affect your faith, your family, and your freedom. I'm going to talk about what's happening in Iran, and we'll look at it politically for a few minutes, but then we're going to look at what's happening inside the church in Iran. It has been remarkable, but there are very significant estimates that indeed more Iranians have become Christians in the last 20 years than in the previous 13 centuries. So we're going to cover a little bit of that. And, of course, we'll get into a couple of other stories that we've posted. One on the history of fake news in the United States. I hope we'll have time to get to that one. And maybe just a little bit of an update on a couple other things taking place. And if we have some time, I got an interesting archaeological fact, one more confirmation of the historical accuracy of the Bible that comes from something that was found in Jerusalem's Western Wall. So we'll talk about that if we can. I might just mention that at second hour today, we have Penny Nance, who is the president of Concerned Women for America. She posted a very good column a couple of days ago in USA Today related to Anita Hill and the issue of sexual harassment and those topics. So we're going to get into that in the second hour. She'll join us live by phone. And along the way, perhaps you have some other things that you would like to add to the conversation. I hope you had a wonderful New Year's weekend. I want to, first of all, say congratulations to Alabama and to Georgia. And, of course, we'll have the national championship next week. There are some bowl games that are a little difficult to watch. If you didn't watch the one from the Rose Bowl, that one was pretty fascinating, to put it mildly, between Oklahoma and Georgia. Always difficult. I got friends on both sides there. If Oklahoma had won, I can think of all sorts of tweets I would have sent out or emails I would have sent out. Because Georgia won, I sent one out instantaneously to Colonel Allen West, and he tweeted back, and we went back and forth a little bit on that, since he was ending the show on Friday by rooting the Georgia Bulldogs. And those of you in Georgia, I'm pretty sure you're pretty excited about that as well. And again, I think we've certainly had a lot of football to watch. We're going to have a lot more coming up. And, of course, we all love baseball. That's going to be up there soon. So hard to imagine all the things that we'll be able to watch this year, both in studio, in these stadiums, and in these various venues, as well as on television. So let me get to the story that has had some play, but deserves a lot more. And that is, first of all, if you have not seen this, we have had a number of anti-government protests in Iran. These have flared up a couple of different times. And the most recent one yesterday left 9 people dead. At least over these now 6 days of demonstrations, at least 20 people dead. And really, as it says here in the Washington Post, no signs of easing as the anger from the streets find new targets. They say here, Aaron Cunningham says, what began as frustration over Iran's sluggish economy has broadened to include open defiance of Iran's Islamic leadership itself. Now, we will in just a minute talk about one of the articles I've posted, and that is the difference between the way the Trump administration has responded to these protests in Iran and the way in which the Obama administration responded to those in the past. I'll get into some of those details in just a minute. Again, quoting from the Washington Post, Iran's establishment was clearly caught off guard by the speed and ferocity of the protests, the largest outpouring of opposition to the state since the disputed 2009 presidential elections. Many young Iranians were frustrated by limits on reformers, including President Hassan Rouhani, to push for greater social freedoms and political openness in a country where the ruling clerics still hold the cards. Working-class Iranians and others, meanwhile, are increasingly unhappy with a stagnant economy despite the lifting of international sanctions under the nuclear accord with these world powers. And this brings us to the response from President Trump. I'm reading now deeper into the article in which it says President Trump fired off tweets that have noted the protesters' demands, but stopped short of giving any indication of a U.S. response. He has also used the moment to again attack the nuclear deal between Iran and 6 nations, including the United States. Trump has claimed that the pact has only served to strengthen the Iranian leadership, although Western allies and others strongly support the deal as a way to curb Iran's nuclear program. So that has been something that has been in the news. And the article that I posted here today, and there were so many articles I could post, but I thought Ben Shapiro's was a good one. Trump reverses the Obama doctrine on Iran. I'll talk about this, and then after the break, we're going to talk about all the things happening inside the church, the body of Christ in Iran. But first of all, Ben Shapiro points out that thousands of Iranians have marched against the regime in Tehran. He said at this writing, 12 of these have been murdered. Now we're up to 20, as I just mentioned a minute ago. And he says that President Trump has tweeted his support for the protesters, spoken out in their favor, and made clear that he'd love to see them topple the regime itself. He says, contrast the behavior of President Donald Trump with President Barack Obama and his administration, which he says deliberately ignored the anti-regime protest in 2009, choosing instead to cozy favor with the regime and maximize Tehran's regional power. The administration even went so far as to give Tehran a legal pathway to a nuclear weapon. He's, of course, talking about the nuclear treaty that we've talked about before here, the non-treaty treaty, by the way. And Obama stated that while he was troubled by violence against the protesters, it was up to the Iranians to make decisions about who Iran's leaders will be, and he hoped to avoid the United States being an issue inside of Iran. And so one of the things that Ben Shapiro does is remind us that, foreign policy requires us sometimes to take principal actions and sometimes not get sucked into various kinds of difficulties. And he says, this is, I think, something that George Washington himself warned against. He predicted that America might find themselves in a time where maybe Europe would pull us into some of their situations. But again, he says our own interests, George Washington thought, would often serve those universal principles abroad, but not always. And allowing other nations to redefine liberty itself before making it a central pillar of our foreign policy would be disastrous. That's why Washington warned in his farewell address that the United States ought not to entangle our peace and prosperity in the toils of European ambition, rivalry, interest, humor, or caprice. And so just a reminder that in 2009, the Obama administration simply said, well, it's lamentable that we have protests in the streets, but there wasn't a lot of aid and comfort or even encouragement given. Donald Trump, in this case, is saying, I would love for you to overturn this regime, but also stop short, which I think was very wise, of saying we're going to offer military support. In some cases, protesters in the past thought that because the United States supported something, we would come and provide aid. All you have to do is go to Hungary and see how that worked out not so well for the Hungarians when they were revolting against the Soviet Union. But when we come back, I want to talk about the other story that just simply isn't being covered. The number of people, the number of Iranians in particular, that are becoming Christians and have done so just in the last few years. We'll have that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
As we get into this new year, I hope that you have thought about making a resolution or two. My suggestion would be for all of us to stop believing in the hysterics and hyperbole that surround our political culture. Fortunately, I'm noticing that more and more commentators are calling for people to bring reason and common sense into these political discussions. Let me be one more voice to join that chorus. Of course, we can offer lots of examples. When Congress was about to pass a tax reform package, Democratic leaders proclaimed that it would usher in economic Armageddon. That is quite a claim for a tax reform bill that lowers the corporate income tax and raises the standard deduction. It is hard to take seriously the claim that it would hurt the middle class when 70% of Americans take the standard deduction on their taxes, and the bill doubles the standard deduction. When the FCC decided to roll back net neutrality rules implemented 2 years ago, we heard apocalyptic predictions that this would be the end of the Internet as we know it. If that was the case, then how did the Internet survive more than 2 decades without these rules? And if we do find out there's a problem, the FCC and the FTC can step in sometime in the future to fix it. The healthcare debate last year provided yet another example of hysterics and hyperbole. One side says that if we keep Obamacare, we will destroy the healthcare market and people will die. The other side says that if we repeal Obamacare, quality healthcare will disappear and people will die. No doubt we'll be hearing similar claims throughout the 2018 election season. It is time, frankly past time, for citizens and leaders in these political parties to speak out against such reckless claims and call for reason and common sense. The American people and the voters deserve a more civil and measured political discourse. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again for the first live broadcast in 2018. By the way, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Talking about Iran for a little bit longer here, and one of the prayer targets for 2018 is I would really encourage you to pray for the people in Iran. Maybe pray that things will change there, but most importantly, as we're going to talk about now, pray for the believers in Iran. If you've listened to this program, you know from time to time we've talked about Iran. We've talked about what is happening there. We've talked about its prophetic significance. And a number of years ago, we even raised funds for the Iranian Bible College. Now, you might say, Iranian Bible College? There's a Bible college in Iran? Well, no, it's actually in Turkey, but they would actually get pastors and other religious leaders. They would get them out of the country of Iran, have them go to Turkey, be trained, and then come back into the country. And so there are some ways in which certainly God's people are growing even in the midst of persecution. And that brings me to one of the articles that I wanted to mention. This one comes from Mark Howard. It's from a number of months ago, and in just a minute I'm going to quote from another piece, Michael Brown's piece that just came out today. But Mark Howard said you can really summarize the story of Iran's church in 2 sentences. So here are the 2 sentences. And you might even want to write this down or share it in your Sunday school class or pass it on to others. Sentence number 1 was, persecution threatened to wipe out Iran's tiny church. Sentence number 2, instead, the church in Iran has become the fastest growing in the world, and it is influencing the region for Christ. So, again, these always seem contradictory, that as persecution begins to rise, you would think that that would be the end of the church. And oftentimes, as persecution rises, it's the opportunity for the church to expand. And so he goes on and says that the Iranian Revolution in 1979 established a hardline Islamic regime. Over the next 2 decades, Christians faced increased persecution and opposition. For example, all missionaries were kicked out, evangelism was outlawed, Bibles in Persian were banned and soon became scarce, and several pastors were killed. All of this happened since 1979. The church came under tremendous pressure, and Mark Howard says, many feared that the small Iranian church would soon wither away and die. But he says just the exact opposite has happened. Despite continued hostility from the late 1970s until now, Iranians have become the Muslim people most open to the gospel in the Middle East. Now, I gave you 2 sentences about persecution and the church growing. Let me now give you 2 reasons why that has happened, because he sort of answers his question. First of all, there's one reason why we have seen so many Muslim people in Iran being open to the gospel, and that's because violence in the name of Islam has caused widespread disillusionment with the regime and led many Iranians to question their beliefs. My newest book, entitled Understanding Islam and Terrorism, which I'd be glad to make available to you, you can find it on our bookstore here, goes into a little bit of the story of why we are seeing so many Muslims around the world. But for a moment, let's just focus on Iran, that are actually becoming Christians. And many of them are saying, if this is what I believe, and this leads to this kind of conflict, whether a Shiite Muslim or a Sunni Muslim, and I see terrorist activities and I see all of this conflict, it's caused, first of all, many of them to actually question their faith. The second reason is that many Iranian Christians have continued to boldly and faithfully tell others about Christ in the face of that persecution. And so he says, as a result, more Iranians have become Christians in the last 20 years than in the previous 13 centuries, put together since Islam came to Iran. In 1979, he says there was an estimated 500 Christians from a Muslim background in Iran. Today, there are hundreds of thousands, some say more than 1 million. In a minute, I'm going to give you a number that says, no, it could be 3 million, but we'll leave his number here because it was written a number of months ago, and that was based upon one set of assumptions, in part, I think, looking at Operation World's estimates. And again, he says, whatever the exact number, many Iranians are turning to Jesus as Lord and Savior. And so again, we see that perhaps the fastest growing evangelical church in the world, at least according to Operation World, you can go to operationworld.org and see a little bit more about that. The fastest growing evangelical church in the world is in Iran. And according to the same organization, the second fastest growing church is in Afghanistan. And Afghanis are being reached in part by Iranians since their language is similar. He goes on and has some incredible testimonies and stories of individuals, but I'll leave that there to move to another piece by Michael Brown that came out today on the stream. And again, he has been very frustrated that not only has the liberal press not covered this phenomenon in Iran while this is in the news, but even a lot of conservative outlets have not done so as well. But we are covering it today here on Point of View. And he says one of the best-kept secrets in the world is that Iranian Muslims are converting to Christianity at an unprecedented pace, perhaps by the thousands every day. I mean, this is Acts 2 and 3, isn't it? I mean, this is just amazing stuff. But anyway, he goes on to make a comparison. He says it's reminiscent of the conversion of tens of millions of Chinese behind the cover of the bamboo curtain. Missiologists, he reminds us, were reporting for years that what the rest of the world found out, and that it's an open secret, leading to headlines like this in 2014, that in the UK Telegraph said, quote, China is on course to become the world's most Christian nation within 15 years. The number of Christians in communist China is growing so steadily that by 2030, it could have more churchgoers than America, unquote. So again, those, I think, illustrate that we have had some phenomenon in the past, China being a good example, during Mao's great leap forward and during the incredible persecution which led to more people being killed during one regime, more so than Stalin, more so than Hitler under Mao Zedong. But nevertheless, the church grew in the midst of all that. And at the same time now, when we start looking at the possibility of what could be happening in Iran, obviously a lot of the protests are from secular Iranians, but some of them are Christians as well. And so there are some that are actually believing that eventually we will see a decline of Islam, maybe even a fall of Islam in Iran, and a rise of Christianity. And going back to Michael Brown, he says, this may sound like a pipe dream, but consider a 2012 Pew Research report. It claims that the share of the population that is Christian in sub-Saharan Africa climbed from 9% in 1910 to 63% in 2010, and much of this growth occurred in the midst of Muslim-majority populations. Then he has some other articles, one from the National Catholic Register, claiming that Muslims are converting to Christianity in record numbers. And this article reports that there are now 3 million Iranian Christians. This would mean a massive jump from the numbers posted in a respected prayer guide, which I just mentioned, Operation World. It claimed a total of 384,000 Christians from all backgrounds. But nevertheless, whatever those numbers might be, I think if nothing else, there are two stories. The story that you'll hear a little bit about, and that is the conflict in Iran. But the other story that you're probably only going to hear here on Point of View and probably a few other places is the incredible explosion of the church in Iran. So hope that is an encouragement to you. If you'd like to join us, maybe you have some thoughts about this in terms of its prophetic significance, in terms of the possible conflicts that will develop in the Middle East. And if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. 1-800-351-1212. And let me, as we go to our break, mention that as we get into this new year, I hope some of you will consider what you might do in your midst of New Year's resolutions to maybe make a resolution to support us on a regular basis. I've really encouraged you in the past to consider how you might join with us in the Truth Team. That is, by giving $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year. We certainly benefit from your financial support, but you also benefit because we send you lots of great information, including our monthly Outlook report and all sorts of other updates. But in addition, for those of you that decide to give at the $45 a month level, we also make available all sorts of booklets, for example, on Sharia law related to this one on Islam, the politicized culture, and the next one coming out here on Make Your Vote Count. And so if you would consider what you might do to join with us on a monthly basis, we would greatly appreciate that. And January is a wonderful time to make that decision and to decide what you might do in this coming year. I'll give you an update as we get more facts and figures and numbers and totals on how we did in 2017. But now that we're in 2018, anything you can do to help us out financially would be greatly appreciated. You can find all this information we're talking about today at the website, pointofview.net, and we'll be back right after this.
In an age of fake news, getting good information is vital. Point of View works to bring you that each and every day. But as Diane in Arkansas illustrates, passing that information along, educating others, is something you can help with. Diane is a college professor. She influences the next generation, and she wrote, "Thank you for your informative letter. I used some of your quotes when I was teaching the Declaration of Independence in my literature class." Diane, like so many, hopefully like you, is taking what she received from Point of View in letters, online, through our app, on the air, and rebuilding truth in this post-truth culture. All of that takes a team. Join the Truth Team at Point of View. Find out how you can help at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. Show your commitment. Make a difference today, right now. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll open up the phones, give you a chance to join our conversation. Let me just mention that Penny Nance will be with us in the second hour, and we'll be talking about this piece that she put in USA Today, Anita Hill is not Hollywood's savior, and talking about the fact that this individual who gained some prominence in the 1990s, and we'll try to explain that to some of you that were not born at that time or were not maybe paying attention, but she's been tapped to lead a commission examining the issue of sexual misconduct in the entertainment industry. And while I applaud that, and while I applaud the women coming forward to speak out, at the same time, Penny Nance reminds us that this has been somebody who in the past was quite willing to defend an individual, in this case the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, who was engaged in certain kind of activity. And so is that the best spokesperson you can bring? And that'll get us into the whole issue of sexual harassment, the whole issue of reporting, what can be done in the future, and so many other issues. And, of course, those of you that are members of Concerned Women for America, you appreciate the work that she's done over the years. She's also, I've seen her being in a number of meetings with President Trump. I'd love to get her take on that as well. So we'll be talking with her in the second hour, but we have about a half an hour before that. And, of course, I put the issue of Iran on the table. It is something I will come back to as well. The tremendous growth of the church in Iran, the number of believers that have expanded dramatically, and may be the fastest growing church in the world. So again, that is something you may not hear in the mainstream press. And of course, the prophetic significance as well. Recognize that when you look at Ezekiel 38 and 39, it talks about this war that is fought against Israel. And one of those countries which is mentioned is Persia. Well, we don't have to guess who Persia is, because Persia was the name of Iran until about, 1935, I think it then began to be known as Iran. So what is the significance there? Most of the people in Iran are Shiite rather than Sunni Muslims. Most Shiites either are in southern Iraq or in Iran. There's a few other places, but those are the primary places. And so they have a very different view of Islam in some ways than Sunni Muslims, which are anywhere from 80 to 85% of the world. And so some of the conflicts between Iraq and Iran, some of the concerns about Iran having a nuclear weapon, some of the concerns about the fact that you also have what are called the Twelvers there. They believe that there was a 12th Imam by the name of Mahdi, and that he will return again in the midst of a conflict. We've talked about lots of this before, all put Iran kind of in our minds. So I certainly would love to get your comments if you have any. 1-800-351-1212. But let me bring you some other stories. And today I tried to bring a couple of stories that you probably would not hear anywhere else. And one of those has to do with the subject of archaeology. Now, many times in my Sunday school class, I give people updates on archaeology. I plan to do this in my own Sunday school class, but it occurred to me that from time to time, this is helpful as well, because one of the things we talk about here on Point of View is not only do we want you to be able to articulate a biblical worldview, we want you to know how to defend a biblical worldview. And one of those defenses is archaeology. History and archaeology validate the historical accuracy of the Bible. And it has been amazing to me that some of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the last couple of years haven't been covered very well by the mainstream press. For example, the discovery of a document that actually shows that there is a King David. Now, I don't think any of us doubted that there was a King David, but a lot of liberal skeptics did, and a lot of non-believing skeptics did, and so to have that is certainly significant. This one that has just come down is something maybe not as momentous, but it's still significant in terms of validating biblical history. And the reason I bring it up is that yesterday it was actually unveiled to the public. Now, to understand this, maybe we should even post the video sometime if you'd like to see it. They have been working on the Western Wall, and beneath it there, they have been doing archaeological investigations and digging down. Well, as they've done so, they have actually taken out the mortar between some of the stones and putting in more substantial concrete so that it will actually be more stable. But as they take that out, they found certain things, and one of these things they found was this it looks more like a vase. There's a technical term for it. We won't get into that. But it had some impressions on both sides. Well, the impressions validate what we read in 2 Kings and in 2 Chronicles and other places in the Old Testament. And so the excavator said this is the first time that such an impression was found in an authorized excavation. Well, what did they find? Well, they have found small clay impressions supporting the biblical references to governors. And they go on to say it supports the biblical rendering of the existence of a governor of the city in Jerusalem 2,700 years ago. Now, again, this is not something that has been open to a lot of criticism, but again, it's just one of those places where, again, archaeology is the friend of the Bible. Because if you look at the Bible, and you might want to look at this tonight, you can go to, for example, 2 Kings, and here the Bible mentions that king-appointed governors existed in Jerusalem, and in 2 Kings, Joshua was mentioned as a governor in 2 Kings. Messiah, I guess is a better way to pronounce that, was documented as a governor in 2 Chronicles. So we have a couple of cases in the Scriptures where it says these were individuals who served as a governor in Jerusalem. And here in this particular case, we now have independent, if you will, archaeological verification of some of that as well. So I think that's kind of an encouraging piece to actually find, once again, that the archaeological discoveries are verifying some of the things that we see in the Bible. And that was revealed yesterday in Jerusalem, so I thought it's a story that might get a little bit of coverage, but if nothing else, you heard it here on Point of View. Just before we take a break, let me go to another story that we have posted here, and it's called The History of Fake News in the United States. And it's written by Jarrett Stepman. And in that, he points out that, we keep talking about fake news. We've had fake news since the beginning of the Republic. And this has been kind of interesting because he says now you have a number of opinion writers who are saying, well, maybe the way to solve all of this is to actually have Facebook and Google to actually fact check and to curtail the proliferation of fake news. And some have even said, well, maybe we need to have the government evaluate that. And Jarrett Stepman says, no, we don't want to do that. The framers of the Constitution, the founders of this country and the framers of this Constitution were well aware of fake news because he says intentionally misleading news has been around since the invention of the printing press. He says, in fact, our founding fathers grappled with this very issue when they created our system of government. They saw that while it was tempting to censor fake stories, ultimately the truth was more likely to be abused by an all-powerful government arbiter than the filter of unimpeded popular debate. Attempts to weed out factually incorrect news reports can quickly morph into fact-checking and manipulating differences in opinion. And he points out that the Founding Fathers were well aware of the power of the press for good or evil. He says, after all, many of them, such as Samuel Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Paine, were newspapermen and pamphleteers. The revolutionary ideas they disseminated throughout the colonies found eager readers, putting them high on King George III's enemy list. And so 3 years after the Constitution was ratified, he points out, the American people amended it by adding the Bill of Rights, which included the First Amendment and its protections of the media. And so he then reminds us that the one time in the Adams administration, he was the second president of the United States, the Federalist Party at that time passed what was called the Alien and Sedition Acts. And this was an attempt to clamp down on false, scandalous, and malicious writing against the government in the midst of this so-called war with France. And there was an immediate backlash. A few journalists were arrested, but the governing party was crushed in future elections and ceased to exist shortly thereafter. And in the United States, press freedom would become an almost unquestioned element of American culture and policy. So when we come back from the break, what he does, I think, very well is to do a comparison between the United States and France. The United States, which has had a decentralized press, and really allowed even false stories to exist, and a hope for the wisdom and the common sense of the readers to sort out what was true and what was false, compared to the French, very centralized government-controlled press. And we'll talk a little bit about some of that historically. And it's just, once again, a reminder that we've had fake news since the beginning of the Republic. The one attempt by John Adams, the second president, passing the Alien and Sedition Act, led to not only his defeat, but the ceasing to exist, the Federalist Party as a whole. And the American people were quite willing not to have government censor their news. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about that. And we'll continue to take your phone calls if you'd like to join us. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Maybe it's the relentless ringing, the high-pitched clinging, or just the reminder that there's something to this season beyond ourselves, but some find the bell ringing a little annoying. At the end of the day, though, the Salvation Army bell ringers do good work. That's probably why Connecticut State Senator George Logan rings the bell outside of a Walmart in Naugatuck, Connecticut each year. This would be an otherwise forgettable act of kindness, except that one atheist group took their annoyance to a whole new level. They sent him an angry Christmas letter. But the letter was less concerned about the bell ringing and more upset that he would dare support an ostensibly religious charity. Rather than support what the group considers a, quote, church denomination, it strongly argued that Logan should focus his attention exclusively on secular charities. This, the group suggests, would solve any appearance of promoting religion and, quote, prevent citizens from feeling ostracized by their elected representatives. Well, if it's not clear to you, let me explain that the law does not require any elected official during his personal time to serve only secular charities. Indeed, the Constitution protects the right of every citizen, elected or not, to serve the charity or house of worship of his choice. The galling bigotry that this organization has evidenced toward the free exercise of this citizen is appalling, especially at Christmas. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let me mention that Penny Nance will be with us, president of Concerned Women for America. We're going to talk about her piece in just a few minutes about Anita Hill and the whole issue of sexual misconduct and how to address that issue. I know many of you have some opinions about that as well. And just before I get back to my piece that we were reading from, let me also mention that tomorrow we will have our Millennial Roundtable pretty much just in the first hour. The second hour we have Dr. Greg Knopf, who's been with us before, and I wanted to bring him on to once again address this issue of kind of a post-holiday depression. He has written quite a bit on depression, has been with us before, and I thought, it's kind of difficult that you have Christmas, you have all the holidays, you have the family around, then it's New Year's, all the lights come down, all the excitement, you got the cold weather and all those kinds of things, and so I thought it would really be good if we could have him on maybe just for an hour to give us some direction here on post-holiday depression. Thursday, Gary Bauer's with us, and we'll probably look at some of the accomplishments during the Trump administration, but kind of look ahead to the 2018 election. Also look ahead to what other things Congress needs to do. There's kind of a major congressional logjam that's brewing right now and some issues that need to be addressed, so we wanted you to know about that. And, of course, Friday is our weekend edition. So all of those issues on the table. I hope you'll join us every single day to talk about this. But just before we run out of time in this hour, let me finish off this piece on the history of fake news in the United States. I like it for a couple of reasons. First of all, it teaches us a little bit about the history of America. As we like to do, we like to talk about America's godly heritage, talk about the founding of this country, the framing of the Constitution, and the rest. And, of course, we also like to talk about some of the First Amendment issues. And in the midst of this article that is put together by Jarrett Stepman, it's our second article we've posted here today, he then helps us understand a little bit of the contrast between the United States and France, and does that by quoting from Alexis de Tocqueville. Now, if you might remember, Alexis de Tocqueville came to this country, looked around, and was wondering why America was so different than France. I mean, after all, we've had an American Revolution, we had a French Revolution. Edmund Burke had some arguments about that, and his articles, in his book, I should say, the Reflections on the Revolution, but nevertheless, de Tocqueville as well, and he said, de Tocqueville caught on to why liberty of the press works so much better in the United States than in his home country. One system was almost entirely free from suggestions of government censorship, and the other perpetually in danger of falling prey to what he called the instincts of the pettiest despots. And so in his book, Democracy in America, he really said that in some respects, creating a government body with the power to assess the truth in media would be far more dangerous than any system of press freedom. He said, for example, and this is quoting from de Tocqueville, whoever should be able to create and maintain a tribunal of this kind would waste his time in prosecuting the liberty of the press, for he would be the absolute master of the whole community and would be as free to rid himself of the authors as of their writings. And so one of the things that he recognized is how this centralized sort of media environment that existed in France oftentimes prevented any kind of free flow of information and news. And so while that was true in his day, it's kind of interesting to see how it's played out in this day. Let me do two contrasts. First of all, Jarrett Stepman reminds us that President Trump has certainly been no friend of the press. As a matter of fact, he says, though President Trump has caused concern by calling members of the press enemies of the people, his threats against the press come through mockery and rebuke rather than official sanctions. And he goes on to remind us that presidential media hating has been around since George Washington was in office, but there have been few serious proposals to actually crack down on reporting. I mean, you've had a little bit Richard Nixon trying to do some things and a variety of others, but by and large, when you get down to it, the only way the president or the executive branch or even members of Congress or anybody else can really react to the press is by maybe making fun of it, calling it fake news, or asking to write an op-ed to counteract something that was said in the newspaper, or to get some time on air to counteract something that was said over the air. Contrast that with where we are in France right now, and this is very different because, again, one of the things the New York Times talked about is this attempt to try to come up with some kind of reporting ban, and the Times said the contrast may have been amplified further by the absence of a French equivalent of the thriving tabloid culture in Britain, or the robust right-wing broadcast media of the United States, where the Clinton hacking attack generated enormous negative coverage. And so then Jarrett Stepman here quotes from the managing editor of one of the dailies over there called Libération. And he said, "We don't have Fox News in France. There's no broadcaster with a wide audience and personalities who build this up and try to use it for their old agendas. Now, the argument by the New York Times, and the argument even by this French broadcaster, a managing editor, I guess I should say, of Libération, is that we are much better off because we don't have Fox News. I think most of us would say whether it's don't have Fox News. By the way, they don't have Point of View either. They don't have Focus on the Family. They don't have Christian media, per se. They don't have a lot of things. And so that's where Jarrett Stephens ultimately says, who has the better system? Since the adoption of the U.S. Constitution, France has gone through 5 republics, 2 empires, and 4 monarchies. Despite the difficult nature of American politics and media, it would be foolish to bet on France's 5th republic outlasting America's 1st. So, again, if you believe in a free press, and certainly those of us around this table do, and you believe that ultimately truth will win out, yes, there will be fake news, there will be media bias, there will be things that certainly deserve to be put into a different category, maybe put into the dustbin of history, maybe totally ignored and refuted. I would take our system where we have a robust opportunity to interact with all sorts of different ideas, than a centralized system where certain individuals, especially the elite, have this idea that they will determine what is true and you will have to believe it. A good example is that Marlon Maddox, 45 years ago, started this program in part because he was concerned about sort of this humanistic filibuster taking place in the media and in the universities. And he really felt that there was a need to have another opportunity, another open channel, another opportunity to hear some things that weren't being broadcast on the nightly news. And so as a result, we find ourselves where we are today. Well, because of the elimination of the FCC fairness doctrine, we probably now have more opportunities to get more news and information than ever before. So even though it's still important to have an alternative source of media, just think of all the stories I've covered today that you will not hear on the nightly news, that you will not read in your local newspaper. The bigger issue I'm beginning to think here in the 21st century is trying to figure out what is true and what is not. And again, one of the things we do so often here at Point of View is we post various articles. The first article that we posted today was the difference between Donald Trump and Barack Obama on Iran. The second one, a whole history of fake news in the United States. And the third one, which we'll talk about with Penny Nance, her piece that was in USA Today about Anita Hill and the whole issue of sexual misconduct. And so those are articles that we encourage you to read, as well as many other footnotes and resources and articles so that you can look for yourself, read it for yourself, make up your own mind. And that's what we will continue to do here on Point of View. If you'd like to know a little bit more about some of the things we're talking about today, they're all available on the website. We also have a link to, of course, Penny Nance, who'll be with us shortly with Concerned Women Fear America. And we also have these articles that are posted, as well as my commentary today, which appropriately is on hysterics and hyperbole. The need for us to maybe just tamp down the rhetoric a little bit and to use some common sense. So again, all of that's available at the website, pointofview.net. You might click on that button that says donate. In 2018, we still need your financial support. We would greatly appreciate it. We'll come back with Penny Nance right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. or call us 800-347-5151. The Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
As I mentioned in the first hour, we're going to have Penny Nance with us. She has posted a piece that appeared in USA Today. Anita Hill is not Hollywood's savior. And I wanted to do this for a couple of reasons. First of all, to really address this issue of sexual misconduct and to really get some perspective on that. Also, of course, to once again reintroduce you Concerned Women for America. This is the nation's largest public policy women's organization, and it is one that has had such a profound influence on, well, for example, Penna Dexter joins us on Friday and oftentimes sits as a guest host, and so many other individuals. And so if you have not joined with CWA, I really want to encourage you to do so. We have a link on our website. But if you're not familiar with Penny Nance, she is the president of Concerned Women for America. It is an organization that has an enormous number of members nationwide, 400 different prayer action chapters, which I also want to highlight in just a minute, but also considered to be one of the most profound and powerful pro-life female voices, that coming from Christian Post. She also is doing a weekly political commentary, speaker at national events, a graduate of Liberty University, and, of course, the author of this piece that appeared in USA Today. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thanks for having me on.
I would love to also get your perspective before we let you go here at the bottom of the hour on Donald Trump, because I've seen many pictures of you sitting across the table with him or having a chance to get to know him a little better. And since so many of us will never meet Donald Trump, I'm certainly looking forward to that. But let's get to the piece. We've posted it as our third article, and it is entitled, Anita Hill is not Hollywood's savior. And it has to do with the fact that the various people in Hollywood have tapped her to lead a commission examining issues of sexual misconduct. Now, Penny, I recognize that I have some younger listeners here that maybe don't even remember the function that Anita Hill had in the testimony and the confirmation hearings of Clarence Thomas. So maybe we need to back up there, don't you think?
Yes, and you know, that's funny. That was actually before my time at CWA. I was a brand new college graduate watching those confirmation hearings of Justice Thomas along with everybody else at home. But then I looked around my office recently and realized there's people, you know, now that weren't, you know, I don't even know if they were born yet. So,
yes.
Yeah, it was 1991 that in which, you know, there was this major issue in which we had a constitutionalist, you know, I'll remind people of what we just went through not too long ago with Neil Gorsuch. We had a constitutionalist jurist that had been nominated, and it was very important seat. And you had a woman named Anita Hill who was she wasn't some hourly worker. She was an attorney. And she had followed Justice Thomas from job to job to job, had arranged for him to come to speak to her students. She was a professor at Oral Roberts University, had insisted on picking him up at the airport and driving him alone to speak, had not done anything to push him away or to discourage any contact. In fact, had gone out of her way to encourage contact with him. And then when he was up for this position for the U.S. Supreme Court, came forward with, for the first time, with an accusation of sexual harassment.
So again,
it was a huge scandal.
Yes, it was. And again, we learned a lot about her too, because it wasn't just that issue. But I thought it was interesting because you could see in some respects why Hollywood would pick her, because she was the first one to, quote, out someone. Although I really have questions as to whether or not some of her testimony was accurate, but we'll leave that on another forum. But then you go in and explain that she also was quite willing to defend President Bill Clinton at the time. Talk about that.
Well, that's right. I mean, I have to make one point here. What Consoling for America has said is, and due to my own experience as a woman who is a survivor of an attempted rape on a Virginia running trail, and even experience in the workplace in my early years, sexual harassment, it is real, right? People are broken. People are sinners. And as Christians, we have to speak for the weak, and predators prey on the weak. So that's a real thing. We cannot turn our head away. But there also has to be process. There has to be, everyone deserves the opportunity to defend themselves, and there has to be process as you get to the bottom of this, because we know people are broken. And so the fact that Hollywood has, instead of owning their sin and, reminding people of the Harvey Weinstein scandal and other scandals that have just rocked Hollywood and spread all over to every institution basically in America, including Congress, instead of owning their sin, they have politicized the process by choosing Anita Hill, who was given process, and it was decided in 1991 that there was no corroborating evidence, and that Justice Thomas, since that time, has had not one whiff of scandal against him. They've chosen her to be the spokesperson. The left never lets things go. And so they made Anita Hill, because she was the person who came up against a conservative. They made her their idol on this issue. I would suggest there are dozens and dozens of amazing women whose issues were never politicized, who have been very strong advocates on the issue of support for women and support for victims that they could have chosen, and they blew it. They chose, instead of owning their sin, to politicize the process, and it really renders the entire effort unserious. And that's my beef with what's happened here.
Well,
and
again,
when we were discussing about Anita Hill, she even went further and was one of the many liberal women who, as you mentioned, defended Bill Clinton, and even said they all do it, other presidents do it. And by the way, his position on abortion and other issues, social issues, means that we should just look the other way, because that means that if you support abortion, by the way, you are somehow a supporter of women, which we strongly disagree with. And so that alone should have disqualified her for the job.
Well, and that is, again, one of the concerns, because you have a sense right now that because I agree with that particular political perspective, and we've had so many, more recently, Penny coming out saying, we probably did turn a blind eye to Bill Clinton back in the 1990s. Well, I'm glad 20 years later some of these people are starting to admit that.
2 decades.
But here we are saying, but it's still, the greater good was he was going to support women's right to choose and all sorts of other issues we agree with, so we turned a blind eye to it. That's not working so much right now in the current climate, is it?
No, and what I would also point out is the people that have come forward and said that, or have done that conveniently when the Clintons have no more political power.
Yes.
They really are, they're has-beens, politically speaking. And so now that they can't help them, Kirsten Gillibrand and others have come forward and said, well, we probably got that wrong. And that's after she was, she sought the support and got the support of Hillary Clinton, supported Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton led the charge against the women who accused Bill Clinton. So, there is a lot to be reckoned with on the political scale. But unfortunately, when this is all happening, and when politics comes into it, because let's be honest, this isn't a Republican or Democrat issue. This is a heart issue. When that happens, we lose sight of the victim.
We'll take a break, continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Penny Nance. By the way, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll have more to talk about right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, as we get into this new year, I hope that you have thought about making a resolution or two. My suggestion would be for all of us to stop believing in the hysterics and hyperbole that surround our political culture. Fortunately, I'm noticing that more and more commentators are calling for people to bring reason and common sense into these political discussions. Let me be one more voice to join that chorus. Of course, we can offer lots of examples. When Congress was about to pass a tax reform package, Democratic leaders proclaimed that it would usher in economic Armageddon. That is quite a claim for a tax reform bill that lowers the corporate income tax and raises the standard deduction. It is hard to take seriously the claim that it would hurt the middle class when 70% of Americans take the standard deduction on their taxes, and the bill doubles the standard deduction. When the FCC decided to roll back net neutrality rules implemented 2 years ago, we heard apocalyptic predictions that this would be the end of the Internet as we know it. If that was the case, then how did the Internet survive more than 2 decades without these rules? And if we do find out there's a problem, the FCC and the FTC can step in sometime in the future to fix it. The healthcare debate last year provided yet another example of hysterics and hyperbole. One side says that if we keep Obamacare, we will destroy the healthcare market and people will die. The other side says that if we repeal Obamacare, quality healthcare will disappear and people will die. No doubt we'll be hearing similar claims throughout the 2018 election season. It is time, frankly past time, for citizens and leaders in these political parties to speak out against such reckless claims and call for reason and common sense. The American people and the voters deserve a more civil and measured political discourse. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation with a few more minutes with Penny Nance, again, president of Concerned Women for America. Let me, just before we end this top of the hour here, before the end, we want to certainly talk a little bit about how you can join up with Concerned Women for America, and we have a link on our website, and we'll also point you to their website as well in that regard. Penny, one of the things that you do, especially as being the head of the nation's largest public policy women's organization, is counteracting some of the things feminists are saying. And I've seen some feminists now saying, you know, this is really good that we're starting to out some of these sexual predators. And if there's a little bit of collateral damage and some innocent people get tarred and feathered with that, that's acceptable because of all the patriarchy. You talked a little bit about this idea of process. Can you speak to what kind of process we need so that we make sure that the guilty are punished, but the innocent aren't punished as well?
Well, and, you know, it's interesting. I can't imagine anyone saying that and thinking that would be okay if it was their son or their husband was the one that was unfairly charged, right? I mean, I would love to believe that as a woman we have, you know, we are superior morally to all men. But unfortunately, as a Christian, I know that we're all sinners. And so coming into any conversation with that as the basis, we recognize that there has to be corroboration, that there has to be a due process. You know, if I didn't believe that, you know, if the innocence would have been gone after the Duke LaCrosse case, after Lena Dunham's book, after what happened at UVA with the Rolling Stone article. I mean, there has to be corroboration. And I will give credit to, I think corporations are trying to clean up their act. It's long overdue, but, you know, the sanitizing daylight that is shed on these issues at the end of the day will make us better. We don't want to live in a world, a Mad Men world, where our daughters are, harassed and manipulated and treated poorly in the workplace. We want to look out for that waitress who has 3 children, who's locked in her job and can't just go find another one when her boss, exploits her or tries to hurt her or harass her. We need to be on the side of the weak. But we also need to use common sense and process in order to get to the bottom of the truth in the best way that we can. We can't always get to the bottom. Sometimes there will be mistakes, but let's do our best. And it's not okay to accuse people that are innocent. It's not okay to convict people or to fire people inappropriately. Let's have a modicum of respect here and really try to think this through properly. And again, as I said, I think that people are trying. They're trying to get to the bottom of this. It's going to take time. It's ugly. It's messy. But let's all do our best.
Let's, if we can, also talk about how people can join with you. I've said so many times when people call in and say, what can I do? I say, well, you got a pronoun problem. It's what we can do. And that is, I would encourage you to join with an organization. And if you go to concernwomen.org, you'll see, for example, you have a petition there to protect the unborn. Now, you've also had a chance to hear from President Donald Trump, and in his first week, he reinstated and expanded what's called the Mexico City policy that prevented us from sending money on abortion. And so in some respects, even though there are some things that Donald Trump has said and done that we sort of roll our eyes and, are not thrilled with, when I look at the actions, pro-life, pro-family actions, when I look at the tax reform bill that doubles some of the standard deductions and helps family with a variety of different issues, I got to be pretty pleased about that. But talk about how people working with Concerned Women for America can bring about some of the changes that are necessary for pro-life, pro-family futures.
Well, if I could just add to that, Kerby, I got to stand alongside Donald Trump where he signed a legislation that allowed governors to rescind support for Planned Parenthood, Title X, our tax money that was going to pay for the nation's largest abortion provider. Neil Gorsuch, of course, was confirmed. A dozen circuit court judges that are constitutionalists. This has ramifications for the future of America, the trajectory of our nation. So just understand there's important work going on that, you may not even know about that is being done every day. And so this is amazing work that Concerned Women for America is focused on, protecting the unborn, speaking for the least of these, being your voice at the table, literally the voice for conservative women at the table with our president, with our vice president, with our country's leaders. And you can join with us by going, as you said, to concernwomen.org. We have a weekly update of what's going on, what we've done this week that you can sign up for and, support us. Support us financially, support us in your prayers, come alongside and join in our efforts.
Let's see if we can also talk about how people can get involved locally, because, as I mentioned just a minute ago, Penna Dexter or Michelle Smith, a variety of others that have been on this program, we're involved in what I call the prayer action chapters. You got about 400 of those. This is an opportunity for people to be involved locally as well, because even though we're a national show and we focus on a lot of the national issues, we also recognize that some of the most important battles are happening at the state and local. And you can join with like-minded women in your own community, in your own zip code perhaps, to pray and to really be involved in some of these very important issues even before they make their way to the federal level, right?
Well, that's right. All politics is local, right? So whether it's on your local school board or whether it's in your state government, Concerned Women for America is involved. And by the way, not only do we have 400 adult chapters, we have 40 and growing college chapters. And this is an essential part of our future. We want to make sure we're investing in these young women and our future leaders. We call these Young Women for America chapters. And so we'd love to have your help, your support for this. And I, send it on to young women, that are leaders on their campuses. And, again, let's just build this out and encourage these young women. They are the future of America. there's probably a future president of the United States coming out of this group. These are amazing young women.
I might also mention, as you go to the website, that you have dozens and dozens of these little brochures that would be very helpful if you're trying to figure out how to articulate a view, maybe on your Facebook page, or you want to contact a local representative or something like that. Of course, you have the Beverly LaHaye Institute, some legal studies, and some other resources. So, again, Penny, anything that people look for and need, they can actually find that on your website, can't they?
Well, that's right. And, again, these weekly updates go directly to the issues that are the most intense issues that are happening this week. So you can see what we've written, what we've said, and help you to kind of formulate your position. Now, I also would be remiss if I didn't mention my book, Feisty and Feminine, a rallying cry for conservative women, which is really just tools for women in America to learn the issues and to gain their own voice. It's a way for women. I just think it's so sad to me when women are caught looking at their shoes when some of these hard issues come up just because they don't know what to say. I mean, we have opinions on these things. God has given us the opportunity to speak. We're born in a great country, and this is our Esther moment. We've got to lean forward, clear our throats, and speak into the culture. And I just really, Concerned Women for America, and through my book, I want to prepare your listeners to be able to step forward and do that.
Well, again, we do have a link if people want to find that, Feisty and Feminine, a rallying cry for conservative women. And again, all sorts of great resources. Let me also commend to you some of those booklets and other resources. Mm-hmm. And if you want to get involved at the local level and meet with like-minded women who want to make a difference. And this is Concerned Women for America. So, Penny, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kerby.
Happy New Year.
God bless. Happy New Year.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, last half hour, we're going to take your phone calls. I mean, some of you have a few comments about all sorts of issues. First of all, how do we address this issue of sexual manipulation and misconduct and inequality? How do we address some of these very important issues in a way that certainly protects women, but doesn't unfairly accuse and ruin the reputation of some individuals? So those are some issues I want to put on the table. We also, in the first hour, spent some time talking about the power of the press. And we did have a call or two of people that wanted to address that, and I didn't want to get into that with Penny Nance. So if you'd like to call back, we want to certainly talk about that and the need for us to really have some wisdom and discernment. And that, of course, relates very much to what we have right now in my commentary, which you can also find on the website, pointofview.net, the viewpoint section on hysterics and hyperbole. So I'll read a little bit of that when we come back and take some of your phone calls. Maybe you have some thoughts about how to address these very important, crucial issues. And we've talked about a lot of issues today. So this last half hour, it's an open line. You pick the topic. We will take your call and also give you a little bit more information on a few of these other topics that we haven't had a chance to address yet. It's a new year, a lot happening, and if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. And, of course, we are encouraging you to visit the website, pointofview.net, find some of the articles we've posted today, including the article by Penny Nance. All that coming up right after this.
In an age of fake news, getting good information is vital. Point of View works to bring you that each and every day. But as Diane in Arkansas illustrates, passing that information along, educating others, is something you can help with. Diane is a college professor. She influences the next generation, and she wrote, "Thank you for your informative letter. I used some of your quotes when I was teaching the Declaration of Independence in my literature class." Diane, like so many, hopefully like you, is taking what she received from Point of View in letters, online, through our app, on the air, and rebuilding truth in this post-truth culture. All of that takes a team. Join the truth team at Point of View. Find out how you can help at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. Show your commitment. Make a difference today, right now. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Had a chance to talk with Penny Nance, president of Concerned Women for America. Her piece that appeared in USA Today about this issue of sexual misconduct and inequality Anita Hill being tapped to lead a commission examining that, and so we gave you a little bit of perspective. Maybe you won't hear from the mainstream press, although to be fair, this did appear in USA Today. Let's take some phone calls. If you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to California, KYCC, and Monica. Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Monica Herrera, and I'm also a member of Violence Prevention in the Workplace, a group that supports emotionally as well as helps with legislation against bullying in the workplace. And I'd like to know if Penny is doing anything in her organization for bullying and the effects of that, or has any or even if you guys have any information on your website that would help people, maybe websites that support people through this.
Sure. First of all, Penny had to head on, and I let her do so, but you might want to contact her. But it does seem to me, since you're in this, let's talk at, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but if I remember right, Article 7 of the 1964 Civil Rights Act certainly would allow individuals who find themselves in a hostile workplace in any kind of harassment. And, of course, now you've broadened it from just sexual harassment to other kinds of harassment, bullying and things of that nature. Those would be actionable items with the federal level, the EEOC. You're in California. Of course, you would have action in California. I might just say that I sit on a board of an organization that speaks on the subject of bullying all the time on various public school campuses. It's called Aim for Success. Matter of fact, we just had Lori on just recently, who is the new executive director there, Lori Kirkendall. And you could go to aimforsuccess.org, and you could see some of the video presentations and some of the PowerPoint presentations, but those are aimed more for children or parents of children, because in some respects that's where it begins. But I would love to know about even what you are trying to do, because when we talk about this whole idea of harassment, obviously there's sexual harassment, but then there's bullying. There is the hostile workforce environments that people find themselves in. We sometimes talk about even the hostile environments that people find themselves in because of their religious convictions, and we talk about that with Kelly Shackelford. So those are just a few resources off the top of my head. And again, if you go to concernwomen.org, you could contact Penny Nance, and she probably would love to know a little bit more about what you're doing there in the state of California.
I've actually joined them just now in listening to your program, and I thank you for bringing the awareness forward. The problem with EEOC, personally, has been the government investigating the government.
Yes,
I'm a victim of disability discrimination, as well as, of course, my religion, being Christian. And I became a steward, and I also joined a team helping to write legislation against bullying. The problem is we don't have laws on the books, and so nobody is prosecuted. They know they're getting away with it, and unless the EEOC does something or you're able to find an attorney, which has been extraordinarily difficult, even for a disabled person to find an attorney. I worked for the state at the time, but in my research, in my education of anti-bully type websites or even information, which I've very much invested into educating myself and reading books on the topic, I've found that there are very few resources for the bullied. There are very few legislators that are willing to work in the field, and they're having difficulty with support within the legislation. We're having difficulty managing hearings, or even having hearings take place within the legislation. We have people willing to come forward to talk about it just within the state government offices, the bullying that's taken place, the health effects that go on, how it destroys families and lives, but yet there's no legislation. And so, we really need, we have sexual legislation. We don't have bullying legislation for adult people in the workplace who, in my case, would like to continue being a taxpayer, and yet I was bullied out of my job, fired while I was on SDI, state disability insurance, fired while I was on leave, medical leave, with doctors behind me and so forth, dealing with PTSD and, of course, a number of other health effects from 8 years worth of being bullied while I worked for the state of California.
Well, again, I just think you're on to an issue that deserves more attention, so I appreciate you bringing it to us. Let me just mention that we have done some programs on bullying. One that we did an entire program on was with June Hunt, and that would be hopefortheheart.org. So I mentioned June Hunt. I also mentioned Lori Kirkendall was on with us. That was one of a number of topics we addressed in Aim for Success. But those are at least a few Christian organizations, but they're not necessarily looking at legislation, but you just may be on the cutting edge of some of this. And over the years, we've seen individuals surface an issue here on Point of View and then take it and become successful with it. So nothing else, I gave you a national platform for that, and you can write to us so that we have your contact information. If somebody wants to contact you and they contact us, we can forward that on to you. So if nothing else, I gave you a national platform to address that issue. And I wanted to, before we run out of time, pick up a few more phone calls here. Let's see if I can go to Georgia. We were talking about certainly sexual misconduct. And Susie, I think you had some comments for us. So what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Well, I wish I had a solution, but I wanted to reiterate what that woman said about it being a heart issue. Thinking about the fact that 1 in 5 girls, for the last facts I looked at, are molested before they ever leave home, and many boys are so. So this is a deep issue. It has to do with morals, and we just need to be a lot more protective of our girls and boys when they're young. But if it's happening in the home, then it can't be legislated and changed in the corporate world just by a law. So,
yeah, but I do believe that maybe it's time for us as Christians to speak out, because, you know, we had Hugh Hefner die this last year, and everybody said, oh, what a great pioneer he was. They said, no, he's the one that gave us a lot of this, because once you start saying that anybody can have sex with anybody else as long as it's, quote, consensual, then, first of all, sex outside of God-ordained marriage is free game. And so then you have all sorts of individuals that say, well, why should I even have that rule? And rules and regulations get thrown out the window. And then we're surprised that we have all the problems with sexual harassment and sexual misconduct. So it seems to me that, first of all, pastors really need to address this from the congregation and speak to this issue. Christian leaders need to do so. But more importantly, we need to say there are certain things that are right and certain things that are wrong. And that requires us teaching young men how to treat women with respect, and also to treat young women to stop being quite as, sexually aggressive as sometimes they're taught in our society. So I agree with you. There are a lot of issues. A lot of it goes back to the human heart. A lot of it goes back to human sinfulness. A lot of it goes back to the natural kind of sexual anarchy that we live in our society. So I do recognize that there are some things that can be solved with legislation, but much more needs to come from the preaching, the teaching, the proclamation of the gospel, and just the need to develop a Christian moral perspective. Because, again, where are a lot of these problems happening? In Hollywood, where sex is free, in politics, where laws and rules and regulations and rules sometimes don't apply, and powerful men get away with a lot more, and when women don't speak up, they're going to do it again. So, Susie, I appreciate you reminding us that it really is a hard issue, isn't it?
Thank you. Yes, our prayers, and like the woman said, speak up when you have a chance, and that would be good if the pastors would lift it up. So thank you.
Well, thank you. You know, again, those of you that are in ministry, just consider that at least once a year, this would be something worth mentioning. I mean, once a year, we encourage you in January, since we're now in January, to have a Sanctity of Life Sunday and speak to the issue of pro-life. Isn't it appropriate at least one time to address this issue of what is appropriate and isn't appropriate? We have a whole generation of young people growing up not necessarily knowing where the lines are. And when you hear young girls saying, you mean I don't have to sleep with the boyfriend on the first date? I mean, you've got some really bizarre kinds of ideas being presented in the media, in the culture, on social media. So if we in the church don't counter program to that, if we don't push back against that, we're going to have the same problems we've been having for many years, might even get worse in the future. Let's take a break, though. Some more of you would like to join the conversation. We'll let you do so. 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break, take some more phone calls right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Maybe it's the relentless ringing, the high-pitched clinging, or just the reminder that there's something to this season beyond ourselves, but some find the bell ringing a little annoying. At the end of the day, though, the Salvation Army bell ringers do good work. That's probably why Connecticut State Senator George Logan rings the bell outside of a Walmart in Naugatuck, Connecticut each year. This would be an otherwise forgettable act of kindness, except that one atheist group took their annoyance to a whole new level. They sent him an angry Christmas letter. But the letter was less concerned about the bell ringing and more upset that he would dare support an ostensibly religious charity. Rather than support what the group considers a, quote, church denomination, it strongly argued that Logan should focus his attention exclusively on secular charities. This, the group suggests, would solve any appearance of promoting religion and, quote, prevent citizens from feeling ostracized by their elected representatives. Well, if it's not clear to you, let me explain that the law does not require any elected official during his personal time to serve only secular charities. Indeed, the Constitution protects the right of every citizen, elected or not, to serve the charity or house of worship of his choice. The galling bigotry that this organization has evidenced toward the free exercise of this citizen is appalling, especially at Christmas. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to California. Rachel, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. And I just wanted to comment that when I'm in a non-Christian forum, public forum, or even sometimes when I'm in a Christian forum, and we're having these conversations, which we have been doing quite often, and we're talking about morals and values and just where we stand as a nation, that they say, well, look at Europe. Look at what France is doing, and look at what Germany is doing, and this is acceptable there, and they have these beaches, and they have this legislation, and they have this, and all that. And so, we're the United States, and we just follow Europe. And my argument is we're not Europe. We're America.
Right.
We're doing things with the UN, so we're supposed to be leading them and giving them guidance, but we shouldn't really be a part of the UN. But if we're a sovereign nation and we're the leader, supposedly, we should be leading by example, right? Which means we should be setting the moral standard for the world. So that doesn't mean that we take lead from Europe and then we one-up it with, Hugh Hefner and all these other individuals, Hollywood and the media and the movies, and then send it over to Europe to set the guidelines. It should be the other way around, where we say this is our standard, this is where we stand morally, and then that's fine if you're doing that over there. But we, as a sovereign nation, being a Christian nation, especially with our president now, and all of our government policies and all of the people that we have representing us, should be setting that moral standard and saying we are no longer going to accept this, and this is where we are. We're taking our ground back from where it was. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you so much.
Well, I think you've said it very well. I did a commentary a while back, and I've known that you were going to go there. I'd try to see if I could dig it out on my computer because I was quoting from Ravi Zacharias, where he had been over in another country, and it was a European country, and I won't embarrass the country or anything like that, but they were talking about how the head of this particular university, and I'm pretty sure it was a business area, was really thrilled about the fact that they don't teach ethics. They don't really try to set any kind of moral standard. And so Ravi Zacharias said, well, and then the guy went on to say that 3 of their most outstanding graduates were served in the government. They were this, and that. I won't go into all the details. And they said how it turned out. Well, this one resigned under a scandal. This one left, and another one. And that's when Ravi Zacharias' wife turned out and said, maybe they should have taught ethics in the university. Because we get this kind of mindset out of Europe sometimes that says, oh, it really doesn't matter. We heard all this during Bill Clinton's time. Character doesn't matter that much. What a person does sexually doesn't affect how they are going to rule from the government. These scandals really aren't that big a deal. We are just overly reacting in the United States. We're a bunch of prudes. We're influenced by kind of Victorian English kind of morality, puritanical kinds of views. And then we see all the scandals over there and say, oops, if you just looked over this last 6 months at what has happened in Hollywood, what has happened in government, and what has happened in business, and then try to tell me with a straight face that none of that had any impact in Hollywood, in the business world, or in the federal government, I would have to suggest that you might need psychiatric treatment because we can see the devastation that has left. And so Rachel's a good reminder of the fact that we should take our cues, first of all, as Christians from the Bible, but even as Americans, we should be leading in a moral sense. And I would hope that instead of having a culture that makes fun of Vice President Mike Huckabee by saying, you know what, I just make it a policy not to go to a luncheon with a woman without my wife or somebody else along, that they made so much fun of this individual. But as I've said before, if you have a teenage daughter, who would you rather that teenage daughter spend time around? Vice President Mike Pence or Harvey Weinstein? Or any of the other individuals that have been accused? And I think we know the answer to that. So as a culture that is so quickly turned against biblical morality and even just basic sexual morality and sort of common sense, it's about time that we return back to it. So, Rachel, thank you so much. And that's a good lead into my commentary today, because one of the things we talk about is the fact that as we are entering into this new year, we're going to really have to use some common sense to evaluate what is taking place. And what I've said is I've been noticing that more and more commentators are calling for people to bring some reason and some common sense back into some of these political discussions, because the title of my commentary is about hysterics and hyperbole. And I say, for example, that, when Congress was about to pass the tax reform measure, you had all sorts of individuals claiming that this was going to usher in economic Armageddon, which is really, if you think about it, quite a claim, when you're talking about a tax reform package that actually would double the standard deduction. And so if indeed 70% of Americans take the standard deduction and you're going to double the standard deduction, that means less of your income is going to be taxed. What does that mean? Your taxes will go down. And the corporate income tax, same thing. It's going to bring all sorts of money back into the United States. It's almost like a tax increase without having you to pay taxes. And for people to say that's going to have no impact at all, amazing. How about the other one, the FCC? We have had these rules for the last 2 years called net neutrality. I've shared with you where they come from. Marxist organizations and others have actually articulated them. But okay, let's assume that those net neutrality rules are really important. We were again told that once the FCC removed those net neutrality rules that had only been around for 2 years, that it would be the end of the internet. It's just hard to accept when the internet was around for 20 years before we ever had any net neutrality rules. But okay, let's just for the moment say maybe somebody made a mistake. What can we do? Well, first of all, if you're really worried about antitrust, the FCC is not the one to deal with it. It's the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. So the FTC could step in. Or maybe the FCC says, okay, we made a mistake and we re-implement the rules or some of the rules that are necessary. So again, not the end of the internet as we know it. And of course, we're going to have another debate, no doubt about this whole issue of health care and welfare reform and everything else. And we hear on one side that if we keep the Obamacare, that it's going to be the end of the health care market as we know it and people will die. But if we repeal Obamacare, then quality health care will disappear and people will die. And you just at some point need to say, can we institute a little bit of common sense, maybe tone down the rhetoric just a little bit so that we can have a reasonable political discussion. So that's my commentary for today. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, it's on our website, pointofview.net, under our Viewpoints section. We have a place there for you to sign up if you don't already receive it. You receive my Viewpoints commentary Monday through Friday in your inbox. Saturday, you receive Penn and Dexter's commentary, so that's one thing that you can do. We have some videos there for you to watch. We also have a reminder that you can actually watch this program on the Facebook Live channel. Of course, we also post this on our YouTube channel, so lots of things that we will cover. And tomorrow, as I mentioned, we'll spend some time around the round table with our Millennial Roundtable. Nick Pitts will be here, and I will be here as well. Second hour, though, we are going to spend a little bit of time with Dr. Greg Knopf. Post-holiday depression. If you know people that are depressed, or you want to know maybe more about that, we will be talking with him about that. Thursday, of course, Gary Bauer with us as we look at what has been accomplished this year in 2017, what might happen in 2018, including the 2018 elections. And then Friday, our weekend edition, Penn and Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, and myself. So I hope you'll join us every single day. And as we come into this new year, I want to challenge at least one or two of you to consider becoming one of our Truth Team members. It's really simple. $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year. If we get enough of those individuals, fundraising is no longer an issue because we have a regular source of income to continue bringing these broadcasts to you every single day. You can find out more by going to the website, pointofview.net. And I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow for our Millennial Roundtable.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.